There are moments in sport that you cannot fake. Moments where the reaction on someone's face tells you more than any stat sheet ever could, and what happened on center court this week belongs firmly in that category. Because when Alex Eala looked up after the biggest win of her career and found Billie Jean King waiting for her, the entire tennis world stopped scrolling for a second and just watched. And once you understand everything that led to that embrace, you start to realize this was never just a nice photo op, it was the sport quietly telling you where its future is heading. To get why that image hit so hard, you have to rewind to earlier that day, when Eala walked out as the 29th seed to face a 6-time Grand Slam champion who was still holding the Wimbledon title from the year before, a matchup that on paper looked like the kind of test young players are supposed to lose, the kind of stage where reputations do the talking before the first ball is even struck. Instead, across 2 hours and 14 minutes of tennis that swung on nerve as much as skill, Eala took apart the champion piece by piece, grinding out a brutal opening set tiebreak that could have gone either way and then closing the door in the second set with the kind of composure that made you forget she was still only 21, and when the final point landed, she didn't pump her fist or scream at her box. She dropped to her knees right there on the grass and the tears just came. Unstoppable, the kind of crying that happens when a body finally lets go of pressure it had been holding for years, and in the on-court interview afterward she could barely string a full sentence together without breaking down again, which honestly told you everything about how much this one match actually meant to her. Now here is where the story stops being just about a scoreline, because waiting for Eala once she came off that emotional high was Billie Jean King herself, and this wasn't some staged appearance dreamed up by a marketing team, it was real, it was raw, and it was caught on camera by enough people at the grounds that there was no denying what viewers were seeing. King made a point of finding Eala right after the win and spending time with her, and she later confirmed the meeting publicly, describing it as a genuine pleasure to be with Eala so soon after her historic victory and calling her an inspiration not just for kids back home in the Philippines but for young people everywhere watching. And if you sit with that for a second, you start to understand why this landed so differently than a normal congratulatory moment, because Billie Jean King is not just some name from tennis history. She is the reason so much of the modern women's game exists in the form it does. She spent decades fighting battles on and off court that most players competing today will genuinely never have to fight themselves because King already fought them and won. So when a woman with that kind of legacy goes out of her way to seek out a 21-year-old from the Philippines in the middle of a chaotic tournament day, that is not a small gesture. That is one generation's trailblazer looking at the next one and recognizing something worth marking. King didn't stop at praise either, and speaking about the encounter afterward, she made a point of saying how much she liked seeing Eala on a stage like center court, calling her a great kid and saying she hoped things would keep going well for her, adding that Eala needed to find a way to calm herself down given everything suddenly coming her way, and King even mentioned the sheer scale of attention already stacking up behind the scenes, noting that Eala had reportedly already fielded somewhere around 400 calls related to sponsorship interest in the wake of this run, which gives you a sense of just how fast the business side of tennis moves once a player breaks through like this. And that reaction from Eala, the tears, the shaking voice, none of it was performance, because anyone watching her walk off that court saw a young athlete who was still processing in real time what she had just done, still trying to wrap her head around the fact that her name now belongs in the same sentence as some of the biggest players the sport has ever produced, and then to look up in the middle of that emotional storm and see one of the true legends of the game standing there smiling at her, genuinely happy for her. That combination clearly hit different, because in her own words afterward, Eala talked about growing up in the Philippines, about how what she had just done might look small next to the resumes of players like Serena or Venus Williams, and she couldn't even finish that thought before the emotion took over completely again, and that kind of raw, unfiltered reaction is exactly the sort of thing that cannot be manufactured for cameras. It only comes from someone realizing mid-sentence what they have actually pulled off. King wasn't the only legend paying close attention that day either, because Martina Navratilova was also present at the grounds, and by multiple accounts she was locked in watching as Eala delivered her on-court speech, visibly moved by what the young Filipina star had just accomplished. And this wasn't the first time Navratilova had shown up in Eala's story, because she has apparently been following her progress for a while now, previously speaking about how Eala deserves a spot on the biggest stages in the sport given the size of the crowd she draws and the weight her matches now carry with them, and that admiration wasn't just vague cheerleading either, because back in March, Navratilova sat down and broke apart Eala's game in detail for the WTA, describing her as crafty and a genuinely good lefty, someone who uses variety well and already has a strong slice in her toolkit, while noting that her serve is probably the part of her game with the most room left to grow, something Navratilova tied back to how light Eala still is physically compared to some of her competition, and that is the kind of granular, technical breakdown that legends usually reserve only for players they truly believe are heading somewhere important, not just polite compliments handed out for the cameras. The support from these two icons actually traces back much further than this single tournament too, because according to King herself, she has been keeping an eye on Eala's career since Eala was just 14 years old, all the way back to a meeting between the two of them at the US Open long before Eala had established herself on the main tour, and Eala didn't win that day back then. But King has said the talent was obvious even at that age, that there was something in the way this kid competed, something in her focus and her fight, that told King she had the tools to eventually climb to the top of the sport. And now, fast forward to Wimbledon this year, that early red has fully arrived, the prediction has become the present. What stood out even more once footage of their exchange started circulating was the advice King reportedly passed along in the middle of all that celebration, because rather than just offering pure praise in the moment, King apparently used the opportunity to prepare Eala for what comes next, reminding her that success at this level invites a completely different kind of attention than anything she had dealt with before. That brands are going to start lining up hard for her endorsement. And the core of King's message was reportedly about staying grounded and being selective, because learning to say no to lucrative offers is going to be one of the harder parts of this new chapter, both for Eala personally and for her family as they figure out these decisions together. And that is the kind of guidance that really only makes sense coming from someone who has lived through that exact same pressure firsthand, which reframes the whole encounter as something bigger than a nice photo. It becomes something closer to a handoff of hard-earned wisdom from one generation's pioneer to the next one standing right in front of her. And if you zoom out, that is really the thread tying this whole story together, because this isn't just casual praise floating around social media. This is King and Navratilova, independently, both choosing to spotlight the same 21-year-old, in the same tournament, in the same week, following the same result, with King going as far as offering actual career guidance in that moment. And when names of that caliber start converging on one player like this, that is not background noise. That is the sport quietly agreeing on something everyone can feel but nobody had said out loud until now. Even away from these headline moments, there has been quiet frustration brewing about how tournaments schedule matches involving players like Eala, with observers pointing out that organizers should think more carefully about where players are actually from and who their real fan base is, especially given just how massive the Filipino following has been shown to be at recent events. A reminder that scheduling decisions carry weight far beyond just seeding numbers on paper. Now here is where things get even more interesting for Eala, because there is no time to sit back and enjoy this moment, since waiting for her in the next round is Jasmine Paolini, the 13th seed and a Wimbledon finalist from 2 years back, and Paolini has already made her respect for Eala very clear ahead of this matchup, speaking right after her own win over Maria Sakkari. Paolini said she believes Eala's game suits grass extremely well, pointing out that she showed a great level throughout the grass swing this season, and she flatly called Eala a very dangerous player heading into their meeting, acknowledging just how much support Eala has been pulling in at this tournament, and saying it is genuinely great for the sport that a player can draw that kind of crowd energy from fans all over the world, while admitting she expects a tough battle with the crowd firmly behind Eala from start to finish. And the two of them have actually crossed paths once before, back in February at the Dubai Championships, where Eala came out on top in straight sets on a hard court, but this time around it will be their first ever meeting on grass, and it's happening in the second week of a Grand Slam with a quarterfinal spot sitting right there on the line, which raises the stakes considerably compared to their earlier encounter. Paolini, for her part, spoke about having watched some of Eala's previous match and coming away impressed, saying she thinks Eala's game translates really well onto grass, that she had already shown a strong level back in Berlin too, and repeating that she considers her a very dangerous opponent on the surface, adding that she is still figuring out exactly how she wants to approach preparing for the match given everything she saw, and referencing their previous meeting in Dubai earlier in the year as a data point heading into what she expects will be a genuinely tough contest. And if you zoom out even further on Eala's story, the picture only gets bigger and more remarkable, because this is a player who did not grow up anywhere near grass courts. She has spoken openly in the past about learning the game on a court that was literally painted over a basketball court back home in the Philippines, a detail that makes everything happening right now hit even harder. And fast forward to this tournament, and she has become the first Filipino player in the entire Open era, male or female, to reach the second week of a Grand Slam event, a milestone that on its own would be worth talking about regardless of how the rest of the tournament goes for her, and she got here the hard way too, opening this Wimbledon with a clean, professional win over Renata Zarazua, then fighting back from a set down against Maya Joint to avenge a painful loss from last year's Eastbourne final, a defeat that clearly stayed with her, before delivering what has become the signature win of her career so far against a defending Wimbledon champion, and with that result, her head-to-head record against that opponent now sits at 2 wins to 1 in her favor, while this particular victory also marked the 7th time in her career that she has beaten a top 10 opponent, a number that keeps climbing and keeps reinforcing that this isn't a fluke run, it's a pattern. What makes all of this land even harder emotionally is how openly Eala has talked about what these moments mean to her personally, saying she holds Wimbledon very close to her heart, that playing on center court in back-to-back years now has given her some of the most intense experiences of her entire life. And she has also spoken about the sense of responsibility she feels toward young girls watching her back home in the Philippines, saying it would be the honor of her life to inspire others. The way she has been inspired, but she has been careful to frame that responsibility in her own way too, saying she wants the next generation of players to grow up chasing becoming the first version of themselves rather than trying to become the next Alexandra Eala, a distinction that says a lot about how she is thinking about her own platform even while she is still building it. So that is who walks into this next match against Paulini, not just a rising player anymore riding a hot week, but someone Billie Jean King sought out personally in the middle of a tournament, someone Martina Navratilova has been quietly tracking and praising for months, and someone her very next opponent is already publicly calling dangerous before a single ball has even been struck between them in this round. And when you line all of that up together, the King moment, the Navratilova scouting report, the packed crowds following her from court to court, the history-making run through the draw, it stops feeling like a string of coincidences and starts feeling like the sport recognizing a genuine changing of the guard in real time, right in front of everyone watching, and however the Paulini match plays out, whatever happens on that particular Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, the bigger story has already been written in the reactions of the people who matter most in this sport's history, because when the players who built the modern game start stopping what they're doing just to watch you play, that tells you something no ranking number ever could, and Alexandra Eala has clearly arrived, and at this point, it feels like the entire sport already knows it, which means whatever comes next in this tournament, whether it ends in a quarterfinal breakthrough or a heartbreaking exit at the hands of a battle-tested finalist like Paulini, this version of Eala, the one who cried on her knees on center court, the one Billie Jean King made a point of finding, the one Martina Navratilova has been quietly championed behind the scenes, that version of her is not going away, and if anything, this feels like the opening chapter of a much longer story rather than the peak of it, because players who make legends stop and pay attention this early in their careers tend to keep making headlines for a very long time afterward, and if the last 2 weeks at the All England Club are any indication, we are watching the start of something that Philippine tennis, and honestly women's tennis as a whole, is going to be talking about for years to come.